can see also here, with regard to data sharing, the protection of digital self-determination already in the Act, in the Federal Act. I would again like to give you some examples. First, only if the patient or individual consents, an electronic health record is actually established. Second, the patient may upload data herself. And third, the patient decides who may access his or her data. So even in emergency situations, if the patient decided beforehand that someone specifically or no one at all may access his data, that has to be respected. I would like to conclude my short presentation with 3 key messages. So first, to enhance trust in digital self-determination and digital transformation, the law must provide a compatible and trustworthy legal framework. And in Switzerland, this law doesn't have to be reinvented to enable digital self-determination. It is a fundamental, among other things, a fundamental right that we have in our constitution and laws. And third, 2 practical examples where digital self-determination has been successfully implemented are the Swiss COVID tracing app and the electronic health records. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. This gives us a first oversight on how we have so far approached the concept of digital self-determination. But as you can see, we are so far very much centered on a Swiss perspective. And as Ambassador Dubach has mentioned, this issue is of transnational problematic. And so the next segment and the following interaction with the audience aims to open up these reflections beyond just Switzerland. So we have a few commentators lined up that will reflect on some of the elements that were now raised. And as I mentioned, after that, we will open the discussion wider. So please share your questions already now in the Q&A section. And later on, you will also be able to raise your hand if you wish to intervene. So our first commentator will be Professor Mark Findley. He's a professor of law at Singapore Management University and director of its Centre for AI and Data Governance. In addition, he has honorary chairs at the Australian National University, the University of Edinburgh, and the University of New South Wales, as well as being an honorary senior research fellow at the British Institute for International and Comparative Law and an honorary fellow of the Law School, University of Edinburgh. Thank you very much for being here. Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation to join this excellent panel and to give some reflections from an international perspective. Could I just say, perhaps somewhat provocatively, that digital self-determination depends on people knowing something about their data. And from the work that we've done recently, a very significant amount of your data you know nothing about. The production of secondary data, the production of data which in fact comes back to you through platform preferencing, a range of different situations where in fact you are totally unaware of the fact that you are a data subject. And so it makes the formal protections of digital self-determination quite problematic. Secondly, digital self-determination from where we're sitting in an Asian context raises 3 issues associated with that phrase. The first is the digital. And digital is obviously something which talks about a space that's related to communication, a space that's related to technology. But that is not a separate space. It's not a space which is cordoned off from the physical. So that the majority of people who use social media day in, day out, cut across the physical and the digital daily. Secondly, self. I'd like to make a point about self. In the Western northern notion of the self, digital self-determination, we're talking about the protection of individual rights, individual privacy, a range of issues like that. If you're looking at particularly an Asian cultural perspective, the self is entirely determined by the family, by the society in which you live. So it's a much more communal notion, even in a business sense. Asian business is about communal concepts of association. And so when we're talking about determination, as Roger opened up earlier on, we're talking about the self being a concept which is much more directed towards where you sit within society. And finally, the issue of determination, and I'll move from that very quickly. Determination assumes some power to choose. We've been doing some recent work on COVID and COVID intervention. And in many situations with groups like migrant workers, the institutional aged, a range of other sections of our society that are discriminated against in a structural way, questions about how they can determine their health, their use of, let's say, surveillance technology in their favor is much limited by their powerlessness in society. So I think when we're talking about digital self-determination, we must consider questions of the power to choose. And we need to build those into any framework of protection, any framework of security and assurance that we believe digital self-determination provides in a very active and vigorous way. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really insightful things here. I mean, if I quickly summarize from my perspective, so you mentioned the aspect of knowledge, the fact that we often actually don't know what kind of data is going around, and that we kind of like have this massive blind spot in that regard. You mentioned the point about the audience. Who are we approaching when you talk about the self? Is it the individual, or is it a larger entity? Which I think is a really, really valid point, and something that Roger mentioned before as well, that the way we have approached it so far is not just the individual as well. It is the individual as well, but it goes a bit wider, and maybe we can discuss about it later on. And then last but not least, the point about the power relations and the power to choose. I think that is one of the that is at the center of this whole discussion. So yeah, very, very useful. Thank you very much for that contribution. Next on, we have Marc-Alexander Breit. Marc-Alexander Breit heads the Artificial Intelligence Task Force in the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Thank you very much, Marc-Alexander, for being here, and you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. And thank you first and foremost for the invitation. I think we heard a lot of interesting things, especially from the use cases when it comes to energy and health sector. I can assure you that the German health COVID app is working quite the same way. But I would like to answer a question first from my point of view. That is, how are digital sovereignty and digital self-determination related? I think that digital self-determination is something that is based on digital sovereignty. Why is that so? I think digital self-determination is something that individuals can do. But me being a state representative from the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy in Germany, and being the head of the project Gaia X that you might have heard of, I think that what we first and foremost need is a digital sovereign data infrastructures. What we first and foremost need is digital sovereign technologies and the possibility to use European technologies whenever it's needed. That doesn't mean that we need to do everything, but we need to be in the position that if we want to choose between a European product and the product that comes from abroad, that there is a European product. So I want to try to emphasize the point. If I give you the notion of European large-scale companies, industry giants, that I have data relations from the United States to China. But as we see, technology and the use of technologies and services is more and more dragged into that power struggle between these poles. So what we see is that unless we are in the position to use our own cloud infrastructures, our own edge computing infrastructures, our own AI services and data management services, that we can still be caught in the middle between this, in the middle of this conflict. That's even more important when you take into account that's not only the political side that brings a lot of attention and a lot of awareness to data sovereignty and digital sovereignty in the corporate businesses. It's especially as a lot of these larger scale cloud infrastructure providers, we call them hyperscalers, go deep into the domains of their former clients, and they go deep into other domains that are not just solely cloud infrastructure or edge infrastructure. Some of them even want to build cars. Some of them want to build automative or automation platforms. Some of them want to go into artificial intelligence that helps businesses improve their CRM and all these things. So what we see is these companies are very big. They have a lot of access to data. They have a lot of access to capital. They have a lot of success with having good and competitive products. And as they are related with their customers, they see how these customers work, and they say, well, you know, we could do this too, because we have the data, we have the money, we have the people, so why should we stop? And this is another point that you need to add to the list of where we are not sovereign. If you want to be sovereign, then you need the right to choose. You have to be in a position to choose. That has been mentioned already. So what we need is to at least be able, and I emphasize it again, be able to choose a European technology based on the fact that this is firmly based on European data protection laws and regulation too. And if you want to use an American company, if you want to use a Chinese company, it's perfectly fine. But sometimes there is something that you do not want to share with other people than the people in your own country. For example, personalized data. Then you need to have an alternative. And this is what we are working on. And I want to emphasize one last point. The importance of platformization has been mentioned already. And I think this is of utmost importance, to be honest, because if we want to sell our regulation, if we want to sell our data protection, then we need good and competitive and strong products. And these products are more and more platformization products or hardware. Take into account the iPhone. What is the iPhone? It's a hardware, obviously, but it's a platform. So the more people are using the iPhone, and I really love my iPhone too, the more people are using the iPhone, the more people will use the health applications of Apple. And if they are good, why not? But it's the same people that when they are asked by their insurance companies if they want to use the app of the insurance company, they say, "Oh my God, no, this is not. I do not want to give you my data because this could have actually some detrimental effects on my health insurance or something like that." But you give it to Apple for free. So this is just something that has been mentioned. The awareness and the platformization, I think they are closely together, because all of us that have been using Facebook or are still using Facebook, they know we paid with our data. When I had my Facebook account in 2006, I had no awareness of the data issue. I had no awareness what I'm going to pay my Facebook account that's free with, and I had no awareness what kind of effect this would have 10 years later, and how transparent I, as a customer, as a person, as an individual, am in relation to these platform providers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, Alexander. And I mean, really interesting here to hear that same element that Mark mentioned before about the right to choose now intersected with the more kind of infrastructure, hardware, and the platform products that you mentioned. So definitely something to take on board for us as well. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Andrea Tester. Andrea probably does not need much of an introduction in this context. She's the chair of the IGF's multi-stakeholder advisory group. Many thanks for being here, Andrea, and we are looking forward to your thoughts on this as well.
Thanks very much, Andrea, and thanks for inviting me. It's really interesting for me to reflect on this conversation from a developing country perspective. And I think I'll start off with really agreeing with what Mark had said, that digital self-determination requires people knowing about their data. And I think it also requires a particular type of access to infrastructure, levels of skill, and also a certain type of citizenship and a relationship between citizen and state, which is characterized by trust. And I think that simply doesn't exist for many people in the world, if not most. But also I'm interested in the comments about digital sovereignty and the relationship between digital self-determination and digital sovereignty, because there is a very active conversation in many developing countries about digital sovereignty. And again, I think if there isn't trust, if there isn't a reliable legal framework, as Karsten pointed out, again, you have immense fear of abuse. And I think, therefore, even if people have the capacity to comply and participate in digital self-determination, they might be reluctant to. I think the other and I'm interested in how the speakers would feel about this, how extreme social inequality actually would impact on the notion of digital self-determination. But to me, an immediate application that I do see in developing countries is perhaps at a more decentralized and localized level. You know, you have in many very poor rural areas, people are creating their own internet access networks, community networks. They're creating their own renewable energy networks using solar. And I think those bottom-up initiatives could be immensely enhanced by digital self-determination. And perhaps if one looks at implementing digital self-determination at a more localized level, that can, over time, through partnership with local government or regional government, actually begin to contribute to more state or national level self-determination being innovated in Switzerland, in fact, can be applied in developing countries, but probably more at a more local level than at a centralized level. But of course, many countries are very different. So these are just very general remarks. Personal data and looking at sovereignty as applied by the state with an oversight role over non-personal data. If anyone is comments on that or have looked at that, I'd be curious to hear.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Andrea. It's really, really useful. I think two things that kind of stand out for me, and one that I'm very grateful that you mentioned, is this element of trust that we kind of like put so much importance on. That is something that has come up so very often in our national discussion. So really good to hear you kind of translate that into a perspective from a country from the global south. And the other aspect that I really enjoyed hearing from you is that approach of seeing digital self-determination as coming from a local context in a localized environment. That is something that we have actually discussed very much as well, based on the fact that we are a federal country where we have a lot of levels, or a lot of different levels of governance and government. So from that perspective, it's quite interesting as well to kind of highlight that point. So thank you very, very much for these very insightful contributions. So last but not least, we'll have our last commentator before we open up the discussion. And I would like to give the word to Dr. Urs Gasser. Dr. Gasser is the Executive Director of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University and a Professor of Practice at Harvard Law School. His research and teaching activities focus on information law, policy and society issues, and the changing role of academia in the digitally networked age. Urs, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for such an important and thoughtful conversation. I was listening carefully, and instead of some sort of adding my own comments, what I'm trying to do over the next few minutes is to distill maybe 4 questions that may mark a productive tension as we are, I think, still wrestling with the concept of digital self-determination and what it means. And we'll see whether the answer is, well, it's all of these spectrums all together, which then I think would have the challenge that it's even harder to say what we mean by digital self-determination. So the first tension I'm hearing out is, are we taking a protective stance, or is this concept really about empowerment? I think we've heard also in Kirsten's presentation the background of digital self-determination, especially self-determination, of course, has a legal history. It's a concept from constitutional law. It's in the realm of protection. It's a defensive right, actually. And I think one question is, as we now translate it into something like digital self-determination, which, as I understand, is not a right per se, but some sort of a concept or position, is that still the same connotation? Or when I read some of the position papers coming out of Switzerland, isn't the idea more around empowerment, or what we would call probably here in the US context, agency? Give people the ability, the skills, the tools necessary, the infrastructures, not only to control data, but also to make meaningful use of data, to evaluate data, which again is less some sort of protective and rather in the category of empowerment. So that's the first tension. The second tension I'm hearing out is it about the technical infrastructure conversation or human capacity building? The concept starts out and the description and the promise that it's a concept to be committed to human-centric issues, but immediately, of course, even in the Swiss context, we talk about Swiss cloud and cloud infrastructures, and it has come up with GaiaX as an example as well. So we tend to shift, we tend to start with human-centric notions, but immediately move towards infrastructure conversations. And maybe that's part of it, yet I think we also have to address or consider what's the mindset requirement, what's some sort of the human software part of the story. Data lifecycle was mentioned, but what about human lifecycle of self-determination? How are we thinking about changing degrees of self-determination when we look, for instance, at young people or elderly people? So what's some sort of the human software part in addition to what we often do, which is to emphasize the infrastructure? The third tension is, and Mark introduced it and Henriette echoed it and added to it, is this an individualistic concept or a communitarian? I think by definition and framing, the concept of digital self-determination starts with an emphasis on the individual. Now, there are at least two issues. One is the one that Henriette already pointed out very helpfully, the question of structural inequalities and asymmetries. I would add to that, even in developed parts of the world, so-called, in advanced economies, we see that relying on the individual hasn't worked out that well. Take Julie Cohen's work and others in the tech and data context. But second, as another dimension to complexify it, isn't it the case that some of the world's biggest problems, from climate change to public health to immigration and the like, may actually need more data sharing, may need something like data solidarity? And I think there it's more than just the label and the semantics, whether we emphasize data, digital self-determination or solidarity. I think these are fundamental questions in how we position our policies and our own mindsets. The fourth tension I'm hearing out is really, is this a story about personal data, or is it a story about all types of data? Of course, the question was already asked, is what's the relation between the concept of digital self-determination or privacy? Even without answering that question, just going through the examples we've heard in use cases, I think there is a tendency at least to focus on personal data. And that's fine and understandable. Yet, if we go back to my first question, well, isn't this really about the story of agency and empowerment? Then I think the real potential in front of us is, and challenge as policymakers, how can we unlock the potential of the data age for individuals so that they can participate in the wealth of data that is accumulated in so many different ways? How can we empower people to become data scientists, civil citizen data scientists, to shape their own lives, to create their own environments and make better decisions based on all data and not only the control of their personal data? So these are a few reflections. My fear is that we say, yes, yes, all of the above, but that, as I started with, may have the disadvantage that the concept of digital self-determination becomes a Rorschach test where everyone can just read into it what he, she, or they want, which might be fine, but not necessarily helpful in policy context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Urs, and I'm incredibly grateful for you to break down this whole discussion into these four tensions. I think you kind of highlight this really well, and obviously I would have my own views on how to resolve these tensions, but I mean, we're now already kind of running quite late into the session, and I want to open the discussion up for questions as well. So you will now be able to raise your hand as well if you would like to speak and to ask questions. We still have a number of kind of open questions. I see that in the Q&A, many of you and us have been very busy in answering questions. But maybe we can pick up some of the unanswered question as well. So one that I see is, how does digital self-determination apply to an individual innovator who wants to create a new global online service? She will not have much agency or freedom to innovate if she and her co-workers have to redesign their product to comply with 37 different set of national digital regulations designed to assert digital sovereignty. So that is one question. It kind of like highlights, I think, one of the elements or the tensions that that Urs highlighted about, is this about empowerment? Is it about protection? And also kind of the difference between the technical concept or human capacity. Where are we finding ourselves in there? Anybody wants to kind of like highlight or react to this question? Don't see any. Maybe if, yeah, Matthias, please go on.
Well, maybe I give it a shot, and I try to come up with an analogy here. So if we look at data as a resource for economic processes, let's say for new products, it's kind of the same when you look at other resources in different countries. If you look about how to produce coal, I mean, you have different regulations in each country, of course, how to run a coal power plant or a coal mine, and how to deal with the working staff that is working in those production facilities and so forth. So I believe economy will find a way, especially such a strong tech economy, to deal with certain kinds of different rules when it comes to data and using the data, especially if we look on the empowerment of the individuals, because that is, for me, is a very central point, that if we want to talk about empowerment, when it comes to self-determination, then of course data or the data access can be done quite easily once you are empowered by the consumer. But we have to come up with rules for that, on how this empowerment would be actually realized. I guess that's my point of view.
Can I add to this?
Sure. Go on.
As I said, I think the thing is, we are always, especially in Europe, talking about regulation. But the thing is, it's good that we do this, but nevertheless, the regulation and the data protection and the values that you have are sold by the product. That's what I meant with my Apple example. Again, I'm not turning against providers or companies here. The thing is, Apple has a good product. So what happens first is Apple sells a lot of devices, and then they bring up apps, and then the people buy the devices and they use the apps. And then somebody, the United States, Europe, we force them to adhere to some rules, and then they stick to rules. But if you go the other way around, first set rules and then try to invent services and invent applications that follow these rules but are competitive, it's exactly like 1 billion times harder to do this, because you have no devices, you have no applications first, you have no platforms, you have no customer base, and then you are supposed to do a regulatory feasible approach for something like an app, just an application. So what I try to say is innovation sells standards, and not standards sell innovation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marco. We then have 2 raised hands already. I would like first to give the floor to Michael Nelson. And I would ask you to kind of keep to 20-30 seconds max, so that we can have the best number of interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking my question from the chat. I apologize for not going on video, but it's still dark here in Washington. I just want to disagree so strongly with what Matthias just said about data being like coal or like oil. It's just, that's completely the wrong way to think about this, because data is global. Data is the new air. And to say, oh, we're going to have different regulations in different countries, no problem. And to say digital sovereignty is consistent with self-determination is to miss the whole point of digital sovereignty, which is to assert at the national level rules that are different than other people and to limit what individuals can do in that country. Thank you again for asking my question.
Thank you very much, Michael. I don't know, maybe we before we react to that, maybe we get to the second intervention that we have from Humaira Rabab, and then we can kind of collectively react to them. And so, Humaira, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's been really interesting to hear all the different views. My question is actually for Marco Alexander. It's about your most recent comment about allowing innovation to take place and then focusing on the regulation. Wouldn't that then open up to opportunities where innovation allows the legislation to change, which may bring in security concerns or privacy concerns, where maybe an innovative product is allowing more surveillance that isn't required at the current climate, for example? So that's really the basis of the question. So if we don't allow more regulation on innovative products or companies, can we then see surveillance being the product being sold to governments because regulation isn't a priority at that stage? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is exactly the point why it's so hard to find the right spot in the sweet spot between regulation and innovation. For example, in Germany, we have laws that if you want to export certain goods to states that have no democratic regime, then you are actually hindered by this. And for example, that we try to just rephrase some of our laws. That, for example, AI, face recognition, is something that we need to think about twice before we export it. Nevertheless, you see industry giants from the United States that said, oh yes, we don't want to foster any kind of autocratic regimes, so we stop building and exporting face recognition software too. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is that there is a thin line between innovation and regulation you need to walk. If you go too much into the innovation direction, then you have all the dangers that you just mentioned. If you go too much into the regulation direction, then you will just have no competitive goods on the world market, and maybe then the autocratic regimes will have the opportunity to flood the world with their services because they are running so well, and well, they don't care about regulation right now. This is what we actually can see, especially in the field of AI, where China is doing a lot of progress when it comes to facial recognition and the use of facial recognition. And obviously, it's for causes that we wouldn't necessarily endorse in Europe. But if we don't step up our game in facial recognition, we'll be in this position to buy these goods in the end. I don't know, but the danger is looming.
Thank you very much, Marco. Now, we're slowly starting to get to an end of the session. I feel like there are still so many questions that we could answer and discuss, but I would like to slightly maybe abuse my my privilege of being a moderator here and ask two questions before we then wrap up with Thomas Schneider to the group. And the first is maybe to the Swiss contingent, or like the experts that we have speaking there, where I would like to, because I thought the kind of the logic that was set up to us by Urs Gasser was really useful. So I would like to ask you just to react to what are your first thoughts to those four tensions that Urs Gasser mentioned, and then maybe to our international commentators that we have. It would be quite useful to hear a quick reflection on How do you think we can go from there? How can we start that international discussions around those four tensions? Andrea, especially from you, we heard that there are so many different approaches, so many different challenges that we face in different countries, in different contexts. How do we go addressing this in an international and meaningful way? So those two sets, maybe we'll start first with our Swiss experts, and I'll ask you to keep it very short and quick, so that we can then wrap up with only a slight delay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I couldn't agree more with what Urs Gasser said. I think he raised some very valuable and important points. So on the one hand, when Urs emphasized that determination or self-determination is something that we already have very much embedded in our Swiss understanding and Swiss system already before digitalization, and that of course helps that we do not have to reinvent the wheel, but that we can sort of already use the principles that we have, and therefore already have, of course, a lot of trust and actually already a system functioning. I think that's a very important point, and also the point that he raised regarding data sharing. So with regard to climate change, he made an example with public health crisis, that data sharing there is actually very crucial. That's exactly what we're also discussing in our network, and that we further have to discuss is how to balance the different, they can sometimes be diverting interests between individual interests and the public interests, but sometimes they can also actually be the same. And so we really have to think there more about how can we further emphasize data sharing and enhance data sharing and make sure that, of course, this is not being misused. So I think that should be, I think that's a very valuable input and a further emphasis that we should also have in our network, and also hopefully in this and the upcoming conversations that we have.
Brilliant, thanks. Matthias, your 20 seconds.
20 seconds, wow. Well, I would, first of all, I would like to echo that these were really crucial points for me as well, and I certainly don't have a clear answer. So I think we have to keep up the discussion on those points. What I do see absolutely is that if we talk about more self-determination concepts like this, it's about the right to choose, and if we want to have a little bit more of this right, we have to talk about digital skills, and that was also mentioned by Andrea, and that are not necessarily very broadly available in communities. And we also have to talk about infrastructure that actually gives the transparency to people so that they can choose. So it's a skill set combined with infrastructure questions, of course, and then a lot of measures to sensibilize people in order to have an increasing skill set to deal with those questions. But I think it's a long way right now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matthias. Roger?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for this very lively discussion. I very much enjoy and learn a lot about what we are going to do. So perhaps just very quickly to react to the 4 tensions mentioned by Urs Gasser, which are very helpful for our own thinking. For the first one, I mean, I think that it's very much about empowerment, but I think the self-determination is a right we have in the current life and we do not have in the digital world. And so it's very much how to bring this concept into the digital space. And so not as a defensive approach, but very much as empowerment. Then on the second one, I'm very much on the side of human capacity building. I see that, of course, there is the infrastructure part, but the discussion about digital self-determination is already very broad. And I would not like to engage in technical infrastructure discussion as well. But that's my personal view. On the third one, the individualistic or communitarian concept, I mean, yeah, the easy answer is to say both. I think it's about individual rights or data control, but of course with a collective dimension. And the fourth one, I mean, we started our thinking very much, and that's also what Matthias Galus pointed out. If we talk about data spaces, it's very much about data from businesses, and it's very hard to deal with personal data. So we try to see how we could use personal data in data spaces. That's where we are with our thinking. Of course, I very much see the point about all types of data, but that's I think we have to think a little bit about this tension as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. And I really would like to give the floor quickly to our international commentators as well. Please, I know it's difficult and it's a big question, but if you can make it as short as possible so that we don't overrun too much, because afterwards we'll have Ambassador Schneider say a few words as well. Andrea, what are your thoughts on how can we progress this internationally?
I'll be very quick. Firstly, I think data self-determination is a very worthwhile concept. And I think we need to start introducing it into conversations about human rights and about democratization and accountability of states as well as corporations. I think Ursa's points are really spot on. And the point about human capacity and technical capacity, I think it needs a lot more thought and how they interact with one another. And then finally, I think his point about data solidarity and how that relates to data self-determination. And my question is really, do we have the legal concepts and the regulatory tools to build data solidarity? So much of what we rely on to achieve self-determination has been personal data protection laws and principles. And so my question really is that enough? Is that enough, or do we need to build new principles to achieve the kind of data solidarity that he was referring to that can, I believe, coexist with data self-determination? Thanks, really interesting session.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Henriette. Mark, your thoughts?
Very quickly, two things. One is, I think we should just stop thinking about data sovereignty, because we live in a global world. And the problem with pandemic control, as we've all seen, is that states focus on their own interests and don't focus on the issue of public health as a global concept. The second issue associated with that is just to realize the fact that in the South world, the majority of individuals don't live in functioning states, and they don't have the power or the capacity to assert their sovereignty or even their human dignity. Final point to think about, and that is that the world is largely run now not by nation states, but by multinational corporations. And the multinational corporations run the platforms that produce the data and manage the data. So concepts of sovereignty really make no sense when we're talking about a multinational world and 70% of those in that world who don't live in functioning states.
Thank you very much, Mark. Marco, I know you might have a slightly different vision, but yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I do, but I do not want to end on a negative note, so I try to end on a positive note. What I really like what was said, because he was doing one clever thing. He zoomed out and made it structural theory, and then he zoomed in and made it from the action theory. And I think if we want to understand how self-determination and data sovereignty and digital sovereignty work together, we need to understand this. If you want to be free, you need to be living in a country with free structures or freedom structures and structural freedom. And if you want to change your structures towards freedom, then you need collective action. So these things are not, this is not a separation, this is not a tension. I think this is just two sides of the same coin, and this is how we should understand it, because I want to be self-determined, but our discussion needs to be digital sovereign, because we know what kind of data is going to flow between you and me, and on what kind of infrastructure is going to run.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Urs, your 5 cents.
Maybe just two meta thoughts about how to have conversations about digital self-determination. The first one builds very much upon Mark's and Andrea's very helpful reminders. We have to be careful with the normative assumptions that we put forward when using a term or a concept like digital self-determination. And I do think, of course, especially in international arenas, we mentioned the South a number of times, this is extremely important to have these normative assumptions in mind. The second is some sort of the output side, the normative consequences of introducing new terminology and new concepts, particularly if it's coming, or is related to a government of a country. I think we have seen already in our space of technology and society issues that there is a danger, there is a risk by introducing highly ambiguous concepts because they can easily be hijacked by politicians and tweaked because they're so open-ended for their respective purposes. And I think these two things, being aware of the normative assumptions and second of the normative consequences of innovative new concepts is perhaps wise to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Urs, for these words of caution in this time as well. So that's really useful. Listen, thank you very much, all of you. It has been really, really interesting. I'm very sorry that we were not able to answer all the questions. The chat has been very lively. We have posted our email address and we will repost it right now. Thank you very much, Dominique, where you can contact us, send us your questions as well. We'll more than happy react to them. And before we end it here, I would like to give the word to Ambassador Thomas Schneider from the Federal Office of Communications to wrap it up and hopefully give us kind of like a vision and a way forward.
Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So thanks to all for this very interesting start of a debate, I would say, on international level. So we'll really hope that this is the start of an exchange throughout the world that will grow and help us and everybody to promote empowerment and digital self-determination and reduce risks of control for people to be controlled by whether it's a government or a company by others than themselves, basically, or their society. So if we look into the issue, we see that it is fairly complex. One element, of course, is legal protection of human rights. But I guess we all agree that it's not enough that the GDPR has led to us clicking 10 times a day on I accept when using a search engine. So that's maybe the beginning, but it's definitely not the end. It's not complete. So we need to think about technical standards, also about economic regulatory incentives that helps individuals, businesses, and societies to move towards self-determination. And the key point that has been raised by many of us, we also need people to be empowered to realize what is at stake, to see the risks, but also to see the opportunities and to enable them to create services on their own, on local level, with whoever partners they trust that help them to improve their lives. This is really, so it's two-sided. One is protection, one is regulatory measures, the other one is empowerment and the identification of opportunities and incentives to get people to become active, to use data, to use the opportunities. And in particular in developing countries, and I'm very glad for all those who brought this in, of course, there are some more challenges about legal securities, about social inequalities, things that make it historically more difficult in some countries or some cultures to get to digital self-determination because already analog self-determination is something that may be more challenging in one way or another. But also there, I think that as Andrea has said, actually the concept of digital self-determination can boost and support, in particular, local initiatives can bring people together with the same understanding so that they start developing their own services and not just use what is there where they have no control and don't know what is happening to their data, but that can encourage people to actually get a perspective, to become more self-determined, become more free, more independent, and also to see the economic opportunities. So, and of course, my last point, I think, and this is what I want to end here, is we all are aware that local initiatives are important, but in the end, this is not a regional or local or national issue. This is a global issue, and we should also think across borders. Also, with regard to the notion of digital sovereignty, in the end, of course, if you have no control on the infrastructure, it's getting very difficult to take free decisions if you don't know whether the information you get is accurate, whether the tool you get is actually doing what you ask it to. So of course, I think this is not a contradiction, but it's something that is a mutual dependency. The question is just on what do you rely to create this digital sovereignty, in the sense that does this have to be your national government that you're forced to trust that will regulate everything for you? Or can it be a more maybe sophisticated, differentiated network of trusted partner in your country, but also with other countries or other actors that help you create this digital sovereignty on infrastructure level, on regulation level? I think this is not the end of the story. I think this is, again, just the beginning, that we need to discuss digital sovereignty, but maybe also think about what does this mean, and do we really just depend on our administrations on national level that will take care of it, or are there maybe other ways? And in the end, finally, we are convinced that this is a big issue for us, and is or will be a big issue for basically every human being in the world that is going digital or is already digital. So the question is, how can we work together? How can we create an informal exchange structure, an informal network as a first step, where people that are working on issues, be it in different fields, health, traffic, mobility, environmental issues, how can we work together to support each other, to share our knowledge, to go towards digital self-determination and digital sovereignty, in the sense that we also need to know what the infrastructure is doing, and we need to be able to have some confidence in it. From our side, this was an invitation to show what we are doing, to see what others are doing, thinking, and now we need to get together a network. So please contact us, share information with us, and help us with your ideas on how to move this important issue forward. So we're very happy to have had this discussion and see it as a good start for something that will probably, hopefully, keep us busy in a positive way for the next years to come. Thank you all very much, and looking forward to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much, all of our panelists. Thank you, the audience, for your very active and lively interaction. Apologies for taking 15 minutes of your life away. That was not scheduled, but I think it was worthwhile. It was a superb discussion. It was really insightful. As Thomas mentioned, if you would like to continue this discussion, do get in touch with us. We look very much forward to all of your points. Thanks again, and hopefully we can see each other next year again, live in Katowice, to continue this discussion at the next IGF 2021. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you all soon.